Okay, where we stopped at the last section was Montag and his firemen had just essentially set that woman on fire. Well, she set herself on fire when they went to burn her books. And so they are on the way back to the firehouse. Okay. Remember, I'm going to read on my book just because it's easier for me, but I'll move the screen as we go through. Okay. They said nothing on their way back to the firehouse. Nobody looked at anyone else. Montag sat in the front seat with Beatty and Black. They did not even smoke their pipes. They sat there looking out the front of the great salamander as they turned a corner and went silently on. Master Ridley, said Montag. Alas, what? Said Beatty. She said Master Ridley. She said some crazy thing when we came in the door. Play the man, she said. Master Ridley, something, something, something. We shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England, as I trust shall never be put out, said Beatty. Stoneman glanced over at the captain, as did Montag, startled. Beatty rubbed his chin. A man named Latimer said that to a man named Nicholas Ridley as they were being burnt alive at Oxford for hearsay on October 16th, 1555. Montag and Stillman went back to looking at the street as it moved under the engine wheels. I'm full of bits and pieces, said Beatty. Most fire captains have to be. Sometimes I surprise myself. Watch it, Stillman. Stillman braked the truck. Damn, said Beatty, you've gone right by the corner where we turned for the firehouse. Who is it? Who would it be? Said Montag, leaning back against the closed door in the dark. His wife said at last, Well, put on the light. I don't want the light. Come to bed. He heard her roll impatiently. The bed springs squealed. Are you drunk? She said. So it was the hand that started it all. He felt one hand and then the other work his coat free and let it slump to the floor. He held his pants out into the abyss and let them fall into darkness. His hands had been infected, and soon it would be his arm. He could feel the poison working up his wrists and into his elbows and his shoulders, and then the jump over from the shoulder blade to shoulder blade like a spark leaping a gap. His hands were ravenous, and his eyes were beginning to feel hunger, as if they must look at something, anything, everything. His wife said, What are you doing? He balanced in the space with a book in his sweating cold fingers. A minute later, she said, Well, just don't stand there in the middle of the floor. He made a small sound. What? She asked. He made more soft sounds. He stumbled toward the bed and shoved the book clumsily under the cold pillow. He fell into bed and his wife cried out, startled. He lay far across the room from her on a winter island separated by an empty sea. She talked to him for what seemed a long while, and she talked about this and she talked about that, and it was only words, like the words he had heard once in a nursery at a friend's house, a 2-year-old child building word patterns, talking jargon, making pretty sounds in the air. But Montag said nothing, and after a long while, when he finally made the small sounds, he felt her move in the room and come to his bed and stand over him and put her hand down to feel his cheek. He knew that when she had pulled her hand away from his face, it was wet. Late in the night, he looked over at Mildred. She was awake. There was a tiny dance of melody in the air. Her seashells were taped in her ear again, and she was listening to far people and far places, her eyes wide and staring at the fathoms of blackness above her in the ceiling. Wasn't there an old joke about the wife who talked so much on the telephone that her desperate husband ran out to the nearest store and telephoned her to ask what was for dinner? Well, then, why didn't he buy himself an audio seashell broadcasting station and talk to his wife late at night? Murmur, whisper, shout, scream, yell? But what would he whisper? What would he yell? What could he say? And suddenly, she was so strange he couldn't believe he knew her at all. He was in someone else's house, like those other jokes people told of the gentleman drunk, coming home late at night, unlocking the wrong door, entering the wrong room, and bedding with a stranger, and getting up early and going to work, and neither of them the wiser. Millie, he whispered. What? I didn't mean to startle you. What I want to know is, well, when did we meet and where? When did we meet? For what? She asked. I mean, originally. He knew she must be frowning in the dark. He clarified it. The first time we ever met. Where was it? And when? Why, it was at... She stopped. I don't know, she said. He was cold. Can't you remember? Only 10, it's been so long. Only 10 years, that's all. Only 10. Don't get excited. I'm trying to think. She laughed an odd little laugh that went up and up and up. Funny, how funny not to remember where or when you met your husband or wife. He lay massaging his eyes, his brow, and the back of his neck slowly. He held both hands over his eyes and applied a steady pressure there, as if to crush memory into place. It was suddenly more important than any other thing in a lifetime that he knew where he had met Mildred. It doesn't matter. She was up in the bathroom now, and he heard the water running and the swallowing sound she made. No, I guess not, he said. He tried to count how many times she swallowed, and he thought of the visit from the two zinc oxide faced men with the cigarettes in their straight line mouths and the electronic eyed snake winding down into the layer upon layer of night and stone and stagnant spring water, and he wanted to call out to her, "How many have you taken tonight, the capsules? How many will you take later and not now and not know?" And so on, every hour, or maybe not tonight, tomorrow night, and me not sleeping tonight or tomorrow night or any night for a long while now that this has started. And he thought of her lying on the bed with the two technicians standing straight over her, not bent with concern, but only standing straight, arms folded. And he remembered thinking then that if she died, he was certain he wouldn't cry, for it would be the dying of an unknown, a street face, a newspaper image. And it was suddenly so very wrong that he began to cry, not at death, but at the thought of not crying at death. Silly empty man near a silly empty woman, while the hungry snake made her still more empty. How do you get so empty? He wondered. Who takes it out of you? And that awful flower the other day, the dandelion, it had summed up everything, hadn't it? What a shame. You're not in love with anyone. And why not? Well, wasn't there a wall between him and Mildred when they came down to it? Literally, not just one wall, but so far 3, and expensive too. And the uncles, the aunts, the cousins, the nieces, the nephews that lived in those walls, the gibbering pack of tree apes that said nothing, 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 and said it loud, loud, loud. He had taken to calling them relatives from the very first. How's Uncle Louis today? Who? And Aunt Maud? The most significant memory he had of Mildred really was of a little girl in a forest without trees. How odd! Or rather, a little girl lost on a plateau where there used to be trees. You could feel the memory of their shapes all about, sitting in the center of the living room. The living room that a good job of labeling. What a good job of labeling that was now. No matter when he came in, the walls were always talking to Mildred. Something must be done. Yes, something must be done. Well, let's not stand and talk. Let's do it. I'm so mad I could spit. What was it all about? Mildred couldn't say. Who was mad at whom? Mildred didn't quite know. What were they going to do? Well, said Mildred, wait around and see. He had waited around to see. A great thunderstorm of sound gushed from the walls. Music bombarded him at such an immense volume that his bones were almost shaken from their tendons. He felt his jaw vibrate, his eyes wobble in his head. He was a victim of a concussion. When it was all over, he felt like a man who had been thrown from a cliff, whirled in a centrifuge and spat out over a waterfall that fell and fell into emptiness and never quite touched bottom. Never quite, no, not quite touched bottom. And you fell so fast you didn't touch the sides either. Never quite touched anything. The thunder faded. The music died. There, said Mildred. And it was indeed remarkable. Something had happened, even though the people in the walls of the room had barely moved and nothing had been really settled. You had the impression that someone had turned on a washing machine or sucked you up in a gigantic vacuum. You drowned in music and pure cacophony. He came out of the room sweating and on the point to collapse. Behind him, Mildred sat in the chair, and the voices went on again. Well, everything will be all right now, said an aunt. Oh, don't be so sure, said a cousin. Now don't get angry. Who's angry? You are. I am. You're mad. Why would I be mad? Because. That's all very well, cried Montague, but what are they mad about? Who are these people? Who's the man and who's the woman? Are the husband and wife? Are they divorced? Engaged? What? Good God, nothing's connected up. So let's just stop for just a moment. This sometimes is confusing for students because Montauk calls the actors or actresses in the walls, the TVs essentially, he calls them family. He calls them aunt or whatever. So there's kind of a reason for that because they essentially have replaced what we know as family. They all are what Mildred is invested in, like we'd be invested in our own family. So Montauk calls these people the family, the relatives. And you can see by this interaction, he's recalling a time that he watched the relatives with Mildred, and he talks. It's a lot of loud noise and a lot of talk, but there's really not saying anything in the talk. And it's all impressive because it's loud and colorful and all out there, but there's really no substance to it. And so he's never really thought about it, but now he's thinking about it, that it all seems very empty. There's really nothing there. And it's what consumes Mildred, essentially, is the family in the TV. Okay. They, said Mildred, well, they had this fight, you see. They certainly fight a lot. You should listen. I think they're married. Yes, they're married. Why? And if it was not the 3 walls, soon to be 4 walls, and the dream complete, then it was the open car and Mildred driving 100 miles an hour across town. He shouted at her, and she shouting back, and both trying to hear what was said, but hearing only the scream of the car. At least keep it down to the minimum, he yelled. What? She cried. Keep it down to 55 the minimum, he shouted. The what? She shrieked. Speed, he shouted. And she pushed it up to 105 miles an hour and tore the breath from his mouth. When they stepped out of the car, she had the seashells stuffed in her ears. Silence, only the wind blowing softly. Mildred, he stirred in bed. He reached over and pulled the tiny musical insect out of her ear. Mildred, Mildred. Yes, her voice was faint. He felt he was one of the creatures electronically inserted between the slots of the phonocollar walls, speaking, but the speech not piercing the crystal barrier. He could only pantomime, hoping she would turn this way and see him. They could not touch through the glass. Mildred, do you know that girl I was telling you about? What girl? She was almost asleep. The girl next door. You know, the high school girl. Clarice, her name is. Oh, yes, said his wife. I haven't seen her for a few days, 4 days to be exact. Have you seen her? No. I meant to talk to you about her. Strange. Oh, I know the one you mean. I thought you would. Her, said Mildred in the dark room. What about her? Asked Montauk. I meant to tell you. Forgot. Tell me now. What is it? I think she's gone. Gone? Whole family moved out somewhere, but she's gone for good. I think she's dead. We couldn't be talking about the same girl. No, same girl, McKellen, run over by a car 4 days ago. I'm not sure, but I think she's dead. The family moved out anyways. I don't know, but I think she's dead. You're not sure of it? No, not sure. Pretty sure. Why don't you tell me sooner? Forgot. 4 days ago? I forgot all about it. 4 days ago, he said quietly, lying there. They lay there in the dark room, not moving, either of them. Good night, she said. He heard a faint rustle. Her hand moved. The electric thimble moved like a praying mantis on the pillow, touched by her hand. Now it was in her ear again, humming. He listened, and his wife was singing under her breath. Outside the house, a shadow moved, and autumn wind rose up and faded away. But there was something else in the silence that he heard. It was like the breath exhaled upon the window. It was like a faint drift, a greenish luminescent smoke, the motion of a single huge October leaf blowing across the lawn and away. The hound, he thought. It's out there tonight. It's out there now. If I open the window, he did not open the window. So it's interesting here that it seems like, he hasn't seen Clarice and he was seeing her every day. And now he has her death, essentially. Even though Mildred's not for sure on that, we can assume that she is dead. And now he also has this event that happened with the woman, and they're kind of like clashing together. The fact that Clarice isn't around anymore, and then that event that happened with the woman, essentially setting herself on fire in the house, that's weighing down on him. This is a good place for us to stop and have you do a DJ on Classroom. So go ahead, take a moment, do the DJ, and then we'll start up again. He had chills and fever in the morning. You can't be sick, said Mildred. He closed his eyes over the hotness. Yes, but you were all right last night. No, I wasn't at all. He heard the relatives shouting in the parlor. Mildred stood over his bed curiously. He felt her there. He saw her without opening his eyes. Her hair burnt by chemicals to brittle straw. Her eyes of the kind of cataract unseen but suspect far behind the pupils. The reddened, pouting lips. The body as thin as a praying mantis from dieting, and her flesh like white bacon. He could remember her no other way. Will you bring me an aspirin and water? You've got to get up, she said. It's noon. You've slept 5 hours later than usual. Will you turn the parlor off? He asked. That's my family. Will you turn it off for a sick man? I'll turn it down. She went to the room and did nothing to the parlor and came back. Is that better? Thanks. That's my favorite program, she said. What about the aspirin? You've never been sick before. She went away again. Well, I'm sick now. I'm not going to work tonight. Call Beatty for me. You acted funny last night, she returned, humming. Where's the aspirin? He glanced at the water glass she handed him. Oh, she walked to the bath again. Did something happen? A fire is all. I had a nice evening, she said in the bathroom. What doing? The parlor. What was on? Programs. What programs? Some of the best ever. Who? Oh, you know, the bunch. Yes, the bunch, the bunch. He pressed at the pain in his eyes, and suddenly the odor of kerosene made him vomit. Mildred came in humming. She was surprised. Why'd you do that? He looked with dismay at the floor. We burned an old woman with her books. It's a good thing the rug's washable. She fetched a mop and worked on it. I went to Helen's last night. Couldn't you get the shows in your own parlor? Sure, but it's nice visiting. She went out into the parlor. He heard her singing. Mildred, he called. He returned, singing, snapping her fingers softly. Aren't you going to ask me about last night? He said. What about it? We burned 1,000 books. We burned a woman. Well, the parlor was exploding with sound. We burned copies of Dante and Swift and Marcus Aurelius. Wasn't he European? Something like that. Wasn't he a radical? I never read him. He was a radical, Mildred fiddled with the telephone. You don't expect me to call Captain Beatty, do you? You must. Don't shout. I wasn't shouting. He was up in bed, suddenly, enraged. I'm flushed and shaking. The parlor roared in the hot air. I can't call him. I can't tell him I'm sick. Why? Because you're afraid, he thought, a child feigning illness, afraid to call, because after a moment's discussion, the conversation would run so. Yes, Captain, I feel better already. I'll be in at 10 o'clock tonight. You're not sick, said Mildred. Montauk fell back in bed. He reached under his pillow. The hidden book was still there. Mildred, how would it be if, well, maybe I quit my job a while? You want to give up everything after all these years of work because one night some woman in her books, you should have seen her, Millie. She's nothing to me. She shouldn't have had books. It was her responsibility. She shouldn't have thought of that. I hate her. She's got you going. And next thing you know, we'll be out. No house, no job, nothing. You weren't there. You didn't see, he said. There must be something in books, things that we can't imagine to make a woman stay in a burning house. There must be something there. You didn't stay for nothing. You don't stay for nothing. She was simple-minded. She was rational as you and I, more so perhaps, and we burnt her. That's water under the bridge. No, not water, fire. You've seen a burned house. It smolders for day. Well, this fire lasts me the rest of my life. God, I've been trying to put it out in my mind all night. I'm crazy trying. So, again, this is almost the thought of this woman is essentially making him sick. He can't even deal with what he did to her. And Mildred is obviously not inept enough to help him deal with that. She doesn't know how to handle him and his feelings right now. You should have thought of that before becoming a fireman. Thought, he said. Was I given a choice? My grandfather and father were firemen. In my sleep, I ran after them. The parlor was playing a dance tune. This is the day you go on the early shift, said Mildred. You should have gone in 2 hours ago. I just noticed. It's not just the woman that died, said Montauk. Last night I thought about all the kerosene I've used in the past 10 years, and I thought about books, and for the first time I realized that a man was behind each one of those books. A man had to think them up. A man had to take the long time to put them down on paper, and I've never even thought that thought before. He got out of bed. It took some man a lifetime, maybe, to put some of his thoughts down, looking around at the world and life, and then I come along in 2 minutes, and boom, it's all over. Let me alone, said Mildred. I didn't do anything. Let you alone? That's all very well, but how can I leave myself alone? You need not to be let alone. We need to be really bothered once in a while. How long is it since we were really bothered about something important, about something real? And then he shut up, for he remembered last week and the 2 white stones staring up at the ceiling, and the pump snake with the probing eye, and the 2 soap-faced men with the cigarettes moving in their mouths when they talked. But that was another Mildred. That was a Mildred deep inside this one, and so bothered, really bothered, that the 2 women had never met. He turned away. Mildred said, well, now you've done it. Out in the front of the house. Look who's here. I don't care. There's a Phoenix car just driven up, and a man in a black shirt with an orange snake stitched on his arm coming up the walk. Captain Beatty, he said. Captain Beatty. Montague did not move, but stood looking into the cold whiteness of the wall immediately before him. Go let him in, will you? Tell him I'm sick. Tell him yourself. She ran a few steps this way, a few steps that, and stopped, eyes wide, when the front door speaker called her name, softly, softly. Mrs. Montague, Mrs. Montague, someone here, Mrs. Montague, someone here, fading. Montague made sure the book was well hidden behind the pillow, climbed slowly back into bed, and arranged the covers over his knees and across his chest, half sitting, and after a while, Mildred moved and went out of the room, and Captain Beatty strolled in, his hands in his pockets. Shut the relatives up, said Beatty, looking around at everything except for Montague and his wife. This time Mildred ran. The yammering voices stopped yelling in the parlor. Captain Beatty sat down in the most comfortable chair with a peaceful look in his ruddy face. He took time to prepare and light his brass pipe and puff out a great smoke cloud. Just thought I'd come by and see how a sick man is. How'd you guess? Beatty smiled his smile, which showed the... where'd I go? Beatty smiled his smile, which showed the candy pinkness of his gums and tiny candy whiteness of his teeth. I've seen it all. You were going to call for a night off. Montague sat in bed. Well, said Beatty, take the night off. He examined his external matchbox, the lid of which said guaranteed 1,000,000 lights in this igniter, and began to strike the chemical match abstractly. Blow out, strike, speak a few words, blow out. He looked at the flame. He blew. He looked at the smoke. Then, when will you be well? Tomorrow? The next day? First of the week? Beatty puffed his pipe. Every fireman, sooner or later, hits this. They only need understanding. To know how the wheels run, need to know the history of our profession. They don't feed it to the rookies like they used to. Damn shame. Puff. Only fire chiefs remember it now. Puff. I'll let you know. I'll let you in on it. Mildred fidgeted. Beatty took a full minute to settle himself in and think back for what he wanted to say. When did it all start, you asked, this job of ours? How did it come about? Where? When? Well, I'd say it really got started around about a thing called the Civil War, even though our rule book claims it was founded earlier. The fact is, we didn't get along well until photography came into its own. Then, motion pictures in the real 20th century, radio, television, things begin to have mass. Montague sat in bed, not moving. And because they had mass, they became simpler, said Beatty. Once books appealed to a few people here, there, everywhere, they could afford to be different. The world was roomy, but when the world got full of eyes and elbows and mouths, double, triple, quadruple population, films and radios, magazines, books leveled down to a sort of paste-pudding norm. Do you follow me? I think so. Beatty peered at the smoke pattern he had put out on the air. Picture it. 19th century man with his horses, dogs, carts, slow motion. Then, in the 20th century, speed up your camera. Books cut shorter. Condensation. Digest. Tabloids. Everything boils down to the gag, the snap ending. Snap ending. Mildred nodded. Classics cut to 15-minute radio show, then cut again to fill a 2-minute book column, winding up at last as a 10 or 12-line dictionary resume. I exaggerate, of course. The dictionaries were for reference, but many were those whose sole knowledge of Hamlet, you know the title, certainly, Montague. It is probably only a faint rumor of a title to you, Mrs. Montague, whose sole knowledge, as I say, of Hamlet was a 1-page digest in a book that claimed, now at last you can read all the classics, keep up with your neighbors. Do you see? Out of the nursery, into the college, and back to the nursery. There's your intellectual pattern for the past 5 centuries or more. So essentially what Beatty is saying here is that as there became more and more people in the world, it seemed like the world started to go faster. And so we needed to be able to read things like the classics very quickly. So they were condensed and condensed and condensed until they were really barely anything. Mildred arose and began to move around the room, picking things up and putting them down. Beatty ignored her and continued. Speed up the film, Montague, quick. Click, pick, look, I, now, flick. Here, there, swift, pace, up, down, in, out, why, how, who, what, where, eh? Oh, bang, smack, wallop, bing, boom, bing, bong, boom, digest, 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 digest. Politics, one column, 2 sentences, a headline, then in midair, all vanishes. Whirl man's mind around, though, about so fast in the pumping hands of publishers, exploiters, broadcasters, that the centrifuge flings off all unnecessary time-wasting thought. Mildred smothered the bedclothes. Montague felt his heart jump and jump again as she patted his pillow. Right now, she was pulling at his shoulder to try to get him to move so she could take the pillow out and fix it nicely and put it back. And perhaps cry out and stare or simply reach down her hand and say, "What's this?" and hold up the hidden book with touching innocence. School is shorn, discipline relaxed, philosophies, history, language dropped, English and spelling gradually neglected, finally almost completely ignored. Life is immediate. The job counts. Pleasure lies all about after work. Why learn anything save pressing buttons, pulling switches, fixing nuts and bolts? So here he's saying that eventually it just got down to where like school didn't even matter. All you had to know is how to like, again, push buttons or do those kind of jobs. You didn't really need to know how to think. So then school didn't really matter. Sorry. Let me fix the pillow, said Mildred. No, whispered Montague. The zipper displaces the button. The man lacks just that much time to think while dressing at dawn, a philosophical hour, and thus a melancholy hour. So when we sped up things, when things take us less time, we have less time to really be thinking, he's saying here. So we lose that time to process information, to let our thoughts wander. Mildred said, "Here, get away," said Montague. Life becomes one big pratfall. Montague, everything bang, boff, and wow. Wow, said Mildred, yanking at the pillow. For God's sakes, let me be, cried Montague passionately. Beatty opened his eyes wide. Mildred's hand had frozen behind the pillow. Her fingers were tracing the book's outline, and as the shape became familiar, her face looked surprised and then stunned. Her mouth opened. Her mouth opened to ask a question. Empty, the theater, save for clowns, and furnished the rooms with glass walls and pretty colors running up and down the walls like confetti or blood or sherry or saturn. You like baseball, don't you, Montague? Baseball's a fine game. Now Beatty was almost invisible, a voice somewhat behind a screen of smoke. What's this? Asked Mildred, almost with delight. Montague heaved back against her arm. What's this here? Sit down, Montague shouted. She jumped away, her hands empty. We're talking. Beatty went on as if nothing had happened. You like bowling, don't you, Montague? Bowling, yes. And golf? Golf is a fine game. Basketball? A fine game. Billiards, pool, football, fine games, all of them. More sports for everyone. Group spirit, fun, and you don't have to think, eh? Organize and super organized, super sports. More cartoons and books, more pictures. The mind drinks less and less. Impatience. Highways full of crowds going somewhere, nowhere. The gasoline refugee. Towns turn into motels, people in nomadic surges from place to place, following the moon tides, living tonight in the room where you slept this noon and the night before. Mildred went out of the room and slammed the door. The parlor aunts began to laugh at the parlor uncles. Now let's take up the minorities in our civilization, shall we? Bigger the population, the more minorities. Don't step on the toes of the Don't step on the toes of the dog lovers, the cat lovers, doctors, lawyers, merchants, chiefs, Mormons, Baptists, Unitarians, second generation Chinese, Swedes, Italians, Germans, Texans, Brooklynites, Irishmen, people from Oregon or Mexico. The people in this book, this play, this TV serial are not meant to represent any actual painters, cartographers, mechanics, anywhere. The bigger the market, Montague, the less you handle controversy. Remember that. All the minor minorities with their navels to be kept clean. Authors full of evil thoughts, look up your typewriters. They did. Magazines became a nice blend of vanilla tapioca. Books, so the damn snobbish critics said, were dishwasher. No wonder books stopped selling, the critics said, but the public, knowing what it wanted, spinning happily, let the comic books survive, and the three-dimensional sex magazines, of course. There you have it, Montauk. It didn't come from the government down. There was no dictum, no decoration, no censorship to start with. No technology, mass exploration, and minority pressure carried the trick, thank God. Today, thanks to them, you can stay happy all the time. You are allowed to read comics, the good old-fashioned confessions, or trade journals. Yes, but what about the firemen then? Asked Montauk. Beatty leaned forward in the faint mist of smoke from his pipe. Were more easily explained and natural, with school turning into more runners, jumpers, racers, tinkerers, grabbers, snatchers, flyers, and swimmers, instead of examiners, critics, knowers, and imaginative creators. The word intellectual, of course, became a swear word it deserved to be. You always dread the unfamiliar. Surely you remember the boy in your own school class who were exceptionally bright, did most of the reciting and answering, while the others sat like so many leaden idols, hating him. And wasn't it this bright boy you selected for the beatings and torture after hours? Of course it was. We must all be alike. Not everyone born free and equal, as the Constitution says, but everyone made equal. May each man the image of every other. Then all are happy, for there are no mountains to make them cower, to judge themselves against. So a book is a loaded gun in the house next door. Burn it. Take the shot from the weapon. Reach man's mind. Who knows who might be the target of a well-read man? Me? I won't stomach them for a minute. And so when the houses were finally fireproof completely all over the world, you were correct in your assumption the other night. There was no longer need of firemen for old purposes. They were giving a new job as custodians of our peace of mind, the focus of our understandable and rightful dread of being inferior. Official censors, judges, and executors. That's you, Montauk, and that's me. So here he is also saying that this need to not want to think because you didn't want to see that one group was inferior to another, that you all are made to be equal. That's also what led to people no longer reading, because knowledge then made you higher in their mind than others, or made your neighbor inferior. And so you don't want your neighbor judging you. So they would burn the books, essentially. Nobody could read anymore, okay? To make people more equal. The door to the parlor opened, and Mildred stood there looking at them, looking at Beatty, and then at Montauk. Behind her, the walls of the room were flooded with green and yellow and orange fireworks, sizzling and bursting to some music composed almost completely of trap drums, tom-toms, and cymbals. Her mouth moved, and she was saying something, but the sound covered it. Beatty knocked his pipe into the palm of his pink hand, studied the ashes if they were a symbol to be diagnosed, and searched for meaning. You must understand that our civilization is so vast that we can't have our minorities upset and stirred. Ask yourself, what do you want in this country above all? People want to be happy, isn't that right? Haven't you heard it all your life? I want to be happy, people say. Well, aren't they? Don't we keep them moving? Don't we give them fun? That's all we live for, isn't it? For pleasure, for titillation. And you must admit, our culture provides plenty of these. Yes, Montauk could lip read what Mildred was saying in the doorway. He tried not to look at her mouth, because then Beatty might turn and read what was there too. Colored people don't like Little Black Sambo. Burn it. White people don't feel good about Uncle Tom's Cabin. Burn it. Someone's written a book on tobacco and cancer of the lungs. The cigarette people are weeping. Burn the book. Serenity, Montauk. Peace, Montauk. Take your fight outside. Better yet, take it into the incinerator. Funerals are unhappy and pagan, and eliminate them too. 5 minutes after a person is dead, he's on his way to the big flue, the incinerators, serviced by the helicopters all over the country. 10 minutes after death, a man's a speck of black dust. Let's not quibble over individuals with memoriams. Forget them. Burn all. Burn everything. Fire is bright and fire is clean. The fireworks died in the parlor behind Mildred. She had stopped talking at the same time Oh goodness, I'm sorry. A miraculous coincidence? Montauk held his breath. There was a girl next door, he said slowly. She's gone now, I think dead. I can't even remember her face, but she was different. How did she happen? Beatty smiled. Here or there, that's bound to occur. Clarice McCullen, we've a record on her family. We've watched them carefully. Hereditary and environment and fronting things. You can't rid yourself of all the odd ducks in just a few years. The home environment can undo a lot you try to do at school. That's why we've lowered the kindergarten age year after year, and to now we're almost snatching them from the cradle. We've had some false alarms on the McCullens that when they lived in Chicago. Never found a book. Uncle had a mixed record, antisocial. The girl, she was a time bomb. The family had been feeding her subconscious. I'm sure, from what I saw of her school record, she didn't want to know how a thing was done, but why? That was embarrassing, you ask? Why to a lot of things, and you wind up very unhappy indeed if you keep at it. The poor girl's better off dead. Yes, dead. Luckily, queer ones like her don't happen often. You know, sorry. We know and nip most of them in the bed early. You can't build a house without nails and wood. If you don't want a house built, hide the nails and wood. If you don't want a man unhappy politically, don't give him two sides to a question to worry him. Give him one. Better yet, give him none. Let him forget there is such a thing as war. If the government is inefficient, top-heavy, and tax-mad, better it be all those than the people worry over it. Peace, Montauk. Give the people contests they win by remembering the words to more popular songs than the names of state capitals or how much corn Iowa grew last year. Cram them full of non-combustible data, chock them so damn full of facts they feel stuffed, but absolutely brilliant with information. Then they'll see their thinking. They'll get a sense, emotion without moving, and they'll be happy because facts of that sort don't change. Don't give them any slippery stuff like philosophy or sociology to tie things up with. They lie. That way lies melancholy. Any man who can make a TV wall apart and put it back together again, and most men can nowadays, is happier than any man who tries to slide, rule, measure, and equate the universe, which just don't be measured or equated without making man feel bestial and lonely. I know, I've tried. To hell with it. So bring on your clubs and parties, your acrobats and magicians, your daredevils, jet cars, motorcycles, helicopters, your sex and heroin, more of everything to do with automatic reflex. If the drama is bad, if the film says nothing, if the play is hollow, sing me with the theremin loudly. I'll think I'm responding to the play when it's only a tactical reaction to vibration, but I don't care. I just like solid entertainment. Beatty got up. I must be going. Lecture over. I hope I've clarified things. The important thing for you to remember, Montauk, is we're the happiness boys, the Dixie duo, you and I and the others. We stand against the small tide of those who want to make everyone unhappy with conflicting theory and thought. We have our fingers on the dike. Hold steady. Don't let the torrent of melancholy and drear philosophy drown our world. We depend on you. I don't think you realize how important we are, to our happy world as it stands now. Beatty shook Montauk's limp hand. Montauk still sat as if the house were collapsing about him, and he could not move in the bed. Mildred had vanished from the door. One last thing, said Beatty. At least once in his career, every fireman gets an itch. What do the books say, he wonders. Oh, to scratch that itch, eh, Montauk? Well, Montauk, take my word for it. I have read a few in my time to know what I was about, and the books say nothing. Nothing you can teach or believe. That they're about non-existent people, figments of imagination. If they're fiction, and if they're non-fiction, it's worse. One professor calling another an idiot, one philosopher screaming down another's gullet, all of them running about, putting out the stars and extinguishing the sun. You've come away lost. Well, what if a fireman accidentally, really not intending anything, takes a book home with him? Montauk twitched. The open door looked at him with its great vacant eye. A natural air, curiosity alone, said Beatty. We don't get over anxious or mad. We let the fireman keep the book 24 hours. If he hasn't burned it by then, we simply come burn it for him. Of course. Montauk's mouth was dry. Well, Montauk, will you take another later shift today? Will we see you tonight, perhaps? I don't know, said Montauk. What? Beatty looked faintly surprised. Montauk shut his eyes. I'll be in later, maybe. We'll certainly miss you if you don't show, said Beatty, putting his pipe in his pocket thoughtfully. I'll never come in again, thought Montauk. Get well and keep well, said Beatty. He turned and went out through the open door. Okay, so this is a good spot for us to stop for a moment and go ahead and do a DJ on Classroom. Okay. Montauk watched through the window as Beatty drove away in the gleaming yellow flame-colored Beetle with the black char-colored tires. Across the street and down the way, the other houses stood with their flat fronts. What was it Clarice had said one afternoon? No front porches. My uncle says there used to be front porches, and people sat there sometimes at night, talking when they wanted to talk, rocking and not talking when they didn't want to talk. Sometimes they just sat there and thought about things, turned things over. My uncle says the architects got rid of the front porches because they didn't look well. But my uncle says that was merely rationalizing it. The real reason, hidden underneath, might be that they didn't want people sitting like that, doing nothing, rocking, talking. That was the wrong kind of social life. People talked too much and they had time to think. So they ran off with their porches and the gardens too. Not many gardens anymore to sit around in and look at the furniture. No rocking chairs anymore. It's too comfortable. Get people up and running around. My uncle says, and my uncle. Her voice faded. Montauk turned and looked at his wife, who sat in the middle of the parlor talking to an announcer who, in turn, was talking to her. Mrs. Montauk, something else and still another, the converter attachment, which had cost them $100, automatically supplied her name whenever the announcer addressed his anonymous audience, leaving a blank where the proper syllables could be filled in. A special spot box scrambler also caused his televised image in that area immediately about his lips to mouth the vowels and consonants beautifully. He was a friend, no doubt of it, a good friend. Miss Montauk, now look right here. So essentially, they took away the front porches so that people couldn't actually have real conversations, but they made it possible for these fake conversations to go between the actors on the walls, the televisions, and the people in the homes. And again, those conversations don't really have any substance to them, so those were okay. They don't want conversations where you can think and dwell on life and come up with your own thoughts. So that's why they took the front porches away from the houses. Her head turned, though she was quite obviously was not listening. Montauk said, It's only a step from not being to work today to not working tomorrow to not working at the firehouse ever again. You are going to work tonight, though, aren't you? She said Mildred. I haven't decided. Right now, I've got an awful feeling I want to smash things and kill things. Go take the Beetle. No, thanks. The key to the Beetle on the night table. I always like to drive fast when I feel that way. You get it up around 95 and you feel wonderful. Sometimes I drive all night and come back and you don't know it. It's fun out in the country. You hit rabbits. Sometimes you hit dogs. Go take the Beetle. No, I don't want to this time. I want to hold on to this funny thing. God, it's gotten me big. It's gotten big on me. I don't know what it is. I'm so damned unhappy and I'm so mad and I don't know why. I feel like I'm putting on weight. I feel fat. I feel like I've been saving up a lot of things and I don't know what. I might even start reading books. They'd put you in jail, wouldn't they? She looked at him as if he was behind the glass wall. He began to put on his clothes, moving restlessly about the bedroom. Yes, and it might be a good idea before I hurt someone. Did you hear Beatty? Did you listen to him? He knows all the answers. He's right. Happiness is important. Fun is everything. And yet I kept sitting there saying to myself, I'm not happy. I'm not happy. I am, Mildred's mouth beamed, and proud of it. I'm going to do something, said Montauk. I don't even know what yet, but I'm going to do something big. I'm tired of listening to this junk, said Mildred, turning from him to the announcer again. Montauk touched the volume control on the wall, and the announcer was speechless. Millie, he paused, this is your house as well as mine. I feel it's only fair that I tell you something now. I should have told you before, but I wasn't even admitting it to myself. I have something I want you to see, something I have put away and hid during the past year now. And again, once in a while, I don't know why, but I did it, and I never told you. He took hold of a straight back chair and moved it slowly and steadily into the hall. Oh, I'm sorry. steadily into the hall near the front door and climbed up on it and stood for a moment like a statue on a pedestal, his wife standing under him, waiting. Then he reached up and pulled back the grill of the air conditioning system and reached far back inside to the right and moved still another sliding sheet of metal and took out a book. Without looking at it, he dropped it to the floor. He put his hand back up and took out 2 books and moved his hand down and dropped the 2 books to the floor. He kept moving his hand and dropping books, small ones, fairly large ones, yellow, red, green ones. When he was done, he looked down upon some 20 books lying at his wife's feet. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't really think, but now it looks as if we're in this together. So Montag, although he had taken a book the night of the fire with the woman, this is not the first book that he had taken. Clearly, he had done this quite a bit of times. Mildred backed away as if she was suddenly confronted by a pack of mice that had come up out of the floor. He could hear her breathing rapidly, and her face was paled out, and her eyes were fastened wide. She said his name over, twice, 3 times. Then, moaning, she ran forward, seized a book, and ran toward the kitchen incinerator. He caught her, shrieking. He held her, and she tried to fight away from him, scratching. No, Millie, no, wait, stop it, will you? You don't know, stop it. He slapped her face. He grabbed her again and shook her. She said his name and began to cry. Millie, he said, listen, give me a second, will you? We can't do anything. We can't burn these. I want to look at them, at least look at them once. Then, if what the captain says is true, we'll burn them together. Believe me, we'll burn them together. You must help me. He looked down into her face and took hold of the chin and held her firmly. He was looking not only at her, but for himself and what he must do in her face. Whether we like it or not, we're in it. I've never asked for much from you in all these years, but I ask it now. I plead for it. We've got to start somewhere here, figuring out why we're in such a mess. You and the medicine nights and the car and me and my work. We're heading right for the cliff, Millie. God, I don't want to go over. This isn't going to be easy. We haven't anything to go on, but maybe we can piece it out and figure it out and help each other. I need you so much right now. I can't tell you. If you love me at all, you'll put up with this. 48 hours. That's all I ask. Then it'll be over. I promise. I swear. And if there is something here, just one little, some little thing out of the whole mess of things, maybe we can pass it on to someone else. She wasn't fighting anymore, so he let her go. She sagged away from him and slid down the wall, and sat on the floor looking at the books. Her foot touched one, and he saw this and pulled the foot away. That woman the other night, Millie, you weren't there. You didn't see her face. And Clarice, you never talked to her. I talked to her, and men like Beatty are afraid of her. I can't understand it. Why should they be so afraid of someone like her? But I kept putting her alongside the firemen in the house last night, and suddenly I realized I didn't like them at all, and I didn't like myself at all anymore, and I thought maybe it would be best if the firemen themselves were burnt. Guy, the front door voice called softly. Mrs. Montag, someone here, Mrs. Montag, someone here, softly. They turned to the stair at the door, and the books toppled everywhere in heaps. Beatty, said Mildred. It can't be him. He's come back, she whispered. The front door voice called again softly. Someone here. We won't answer. Montag lay back against the wall and then slowly sank to the crouching position and began to nudge the books, bewildered with his thumb, his forefinger. He was shivering, and he wanted above all to shove the books up through the ventilator again, but he knew he could not face Beatty again. He crouched, and then he sat, and the voice of the front door spoke again, more insistently. Montag picked a single small volume from the floor. Where do we begin? He opened the book halfway and peered at it. We begin by beginning, I guess. He'll come in, said Mildred, and burn us and the books. The front door voice faded at last. There was silence. Montag felt the presence of someone behind the door, waiting, listening. Then the footsteps going away down the walk and over the lawn. Let's see what this is, said Montag. He spoke the words haughtily and with double self-consciousness. He had a dozen pages here and there and came at last to this. It is computed that 11,000 persons have at several times suffered a death rather than submit to break their eggs at the smaller end. Mildred sat across the hall from him. What does it mean? Doesn't mean anything. The captain was right. Here now, said Montag. We'll start over again at the beginning. So with the books, Montag decides he has had this realization because of his interactions with Clarice that he really doesn't like the people that he works with, that he really doesn't like himself, that he enjoys talking to her, which is why he kind of looked forward to seeing her every morning. And then Beatty's talk, which was supposed to make him feel like it was justified what he was doing, only made it feel more so like he really needed to know what was in the books. So he has taken all his hidden books out and he wants to go over them with Clarice and try to make meaning of them, to see really what it is that they say and hopefully bring some meaning to his life. Okay. So this is our next week's section. So we're going to stop here and do one more DJ for the day in your classroom. Okay. Thanks, guys. Talk to you later.